Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next webinar in the National 303D Restoring Our Impaired Waters webinar series. We're excited to be back and continuing this series with our webinar on temperature TMDLs and climate change. My name is Olivia Graham, and I'm an environmental analyst at NUIPIC. And today we'll be joined by James Kardouni from the Washington Department of Ecology, and he will be talking about incorporating climate change analysis into stream temperature TMDLs, the South Fork Nooksack River pilot project. Just a little bit about James. He began his career at Olympic National Park monitoring coastal habitat and water quality. He moved on to work for the Washington State Department of Ecology Environmental Assessment Program, developing total maximum daily load studies and conducting watershed health monitoring. He also worked at Grand Teton National Park on a variety of natural resource projects before joining Ecology in 2020 again. James is currently the TMDL lead in the Nooksack River Basin and San Juan Islands in Ecology's water quality program. He specializes in data collection and analysis, technical writing, and applying GIS techniques. He holds a Master of Science from Western Washington University College of Environment, where he researched vegetative and ectomycorrhizal succession along the Elwha River post-dam removal. Just a couple of things before we get started. Just a little bit about NUIPIC. We are a regional commission that helps the states of the Northeast preserve and advance water quality. With support from EPA, we've been running this webinar series since 2016 as part of our work to develop, coordinate, and conduct training programs that serve water quality professionals regionally and nationwide. And as always, presentations in this series represent the views of the speaker and don't necessarily reflect NUIPIC or EPA endorsements or positions. A couple of Zoom reminders. We ask that you please stay on mute and keep your camera off during the presentation. If you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat. I'll be monitoring it as we go, and we will have time for questions after the presentation. And if you're having trouble hearing, try switching to phone audio or send me a message and I can try to help you. Another way to shape the future of this series is to propose a webinar. These can be submitted on our website or via email. We have funding available for eligible applicants if they participate. So please reach out with questions or ideas. We're always looking for different webinar topics to host in this series. We also have a library of all of our past webinars on YouTube. So this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on YouTube soon after we're finished today. And then just a couple things happening at NUIPIC. So we have our Success Stories project. We are looking for stories and innovative approaches to TMDLs. So if you're interested, please reach out to me. We just wrapped up season 2 of the Clean Water Pod. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify. Registration is open for the 12th U.S. Symposium on Harmful Algae. That's late October in Portland. You can contact Devin for any more information. And then, as always, just follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn to keep up with latest events and conferences and things that we're doing. And then, lastly, after the webinar, I will send out a link to a short survey. We always value your feedback and always want to know the future topics you'd like to see covered. And with that, I will turn it over to James. Thank you.
Welcome and thanks for tuning in. I'll talk about the South Fork Nooksack River temperature TMDL. It was completed and approved by EPA in 2020, and then how climate change was incorporated into the study. And there are some broader parallel studies as well. And the mission of the Washington State Department of Ecology's water quality program is to ensure that all aquatic life and communities in the watershed experience cool, clean water to refresh and sustain us in a changing climate. Our vision involves Washington's communities working together and with us to sustain healthy, thriving watersheds and provide cool, clean water to fish, shellfish, wildlife, people, businesses, and future generations. So just the project overview, quick look at the project setting, and then the temperature TMDL component, the climate change component, and then how the climate change was influenced the TMDL study. And then I'll talk about implementation, has been done on the Nooksack, South Fork Nooksack River, and then we'll follow up with a discussion. So this is a list of the project team. It includes local tribes, federal and state organizations, contractors, and universities. And here we are at the project setting. The project is located in the northwest region of Washington State, and the South Fork Nooksack River watershed is part of the traditional homelands of the indigenous Coast Salish people. And this includes the Lummi Nation and the Nooksack tribes, as I will discuss some of their work that they're doing in the watershed throughout this presentation. So now we're zooming in here. This is the watershed boundary. We're looking to get at a satellite image. I'm going to get my laser pointer on here. And so to the east here, this is the Twin Sister Mountain Range. And it has the greatest snowpack potential and elevation prominence. And we'll see that snowpack's really important for this system to keep it cool. And then the valley floor is low density rural and agricultural land cover, with most of it occurring in this northern downstream section. And it's a much wider floodplain compared to the headwater system. And the main stem length is roughly 36 river miles. And the average annual discharge, just for the size of the river, is around 1,000 cubic feet per second. And then this watershed area is about 190 square miles. And the South Fork Nooksack River is one of 3 forks that comprise the main stem of the Nooksack River that ultimately flows into the marine water of Bellingham Bay. And one unique thing about the South Fork is that it's the only system that is not glacial fed. It has some snowpack and some ice, but ice fields. So that really has some implications for climate change. So now we're zooming in even further, and this is just looking at the valley floor from an aerial perspective, and we see the general status of the riparian zone from this perspective, with varying levels of condition. And so the primary goal of the TMDL is to increase riparian shade to cool down in-stream temperatures, and we'll cover this later in the presentation on how it's done. And then finally, I just want to show the land cover map. So we're looking at the same thing, but this is remote sensing. We just see development, pastures, crops, and forestry, and very minimal development in this watershed. It's very rural. So, and then the history, this area was heavily logged with minimal regulation beginning in the early 1900s. And since the trees were removed, the river has not maintained its historical rate of channel migration. We also believe that the historical logging added large amounts of sediment to the river, contributing to a wider and shallower channel. And then the combined effects of the shallow river, wide channel migration zone, and insufficient riparian shading creates more exposure to the sun, making the waters warmer. So the South Fork Nooksack River area provides habitat for several salmonid species throughout the year, 3 of which are threatened under the Endangered Species Act. And local tribes are reliant on salmon for subsistence, cultural, ceremonial, and commercial uses. Elevated stream temperatures and the lack of habitat diversity are the primary limiting factors to salmon recovery. Low summer flows are detrimental and limit the recovery of fish populations. These impacts are projected to worsen in a warming climate. We likely already saw the effects of climate change when pre-spawning mortality soared to an unprecedented level. during the summer of 2021, where over 2,500 Chinook salmon died on the spawning grounds due to disease associated with high river temperatures. Okay, now I'll talk about the temperature TMDL and how it addresses the Clean Water Act requirements. And that's my primary objective and role. There are parallel recovery efforts, however, that are conducted by a wide variety of organizations at the local, state, and federal and tribal levels, along with information obtained through research. It also works in concert with this TMDL work. So the nuts and bolts, the TMDL quantifies a thermal pollution budget, which is accomplished by characterizing stream temperatures and the processes that govern thermal regimes. This includes measuring riparian vegetation and shade, as well as the influence of tributaries and groundwater surface water interactions on the river system's heat budget. To do this, it requires the development of predictive temperature models. And by modeling critical conditions, meaning the warmest time of the year, we determine the South Fork Nooksack River's capacity to assimilate heat and evaluate the system's potential temperatures, which is an approximate of natural temperature conditions using 100-year system potential vegetation, which is that riparian growth zone that provides the shade, as an estimate of the natural river condition. So starting with the bullet point 6 here, the temperature TMDL is established, and I'll use TMDL often in this, total maximum data load, just as a reminder. It's the at or below the loading capacity to meet the temperature or water quality criteria and protect designated uses. And so each term in the TMDL is, so these are our allocations, the waste oil allocations, load allocations, and margin of safety. They indicate the allowable pollutant load plus the margin of safety component, and that's defined by modeling and assessing the warmest time of the year. One unique characteristic of this TMDL study incorporates an assessment of climate change, which we'll go over. And the climate change analysis was also used to develop the implementation plan component of the TMDL, which is the implementation plan is a strategy for riparian restoration and other restorative activities. And the overarching objective is to support recovery efforts for salmon and promote salmon habitat restoration effectiveness. And so this is just a map showing what segments we're addressing under the Clean Water Act requirements, and we see 14 main stem and 9 tributary through a 3D listed impairments for temperature. And the TMDL also addresses the entirety of the watershed. And so what are our targets? What's that water quality criteria? We see 3 different criterion based on the most sensitive aquatic use. And these criteria use the highest 7-day average of the daily maximum temperatures that are specific to both reach and species biology. And there's a 4th water quality criterion in the standards, and that's based on natural conditions, and we'll see that in the next slide here. So what if the criteria cannot be met under the natural conditions? The water quality standard defined a natural condition as a condition before any human-caused pollution. So this is the best I could do with an aerial ortho imagery of the 1943 condition of the watershed. But we need to go back beyond that, because here we see a lot of clearing. So we do model those conditions, and we plant trees and put those as kind of our natural condition and what the stream temperature responses would be. And they represent the system potential vegetation of a certain buffer width. And so I'll use this term system potential vegetation often throughout this presentation. Now we'll take a look at the models here and why we model. Of course, it's to quantify the TMDL, but there are several reasons here. But we can use the TMDL surrogates such as heat loads and watts per meter squared and effective shade to establish meaningful and measurable pollutant loading targets. Effective shade targets are useful in translating solar radiation loads into streamside vegetation metrics to quantify the TMDL. And then the shade model was used as an input to the water quality model. And we call it a Qual2K model, Qual2KW model. Modeling analysis determines the components of the heat budget and simulates water temperatures under observed and system potential vegetation conditions. And we compare those two. And there are complementary reasons here as well to model the system. So we'll go over a little diagram here. It's an illustration of the model components. The stream response model includes channel dimensions, thermal exchanges along with these governing processes listed here. And the shade model accounts for ambient climate, incoming solar radiation, and finally, the shade that's quantified by the amount of incoming solar radiation that is not attenuated by topography and the riparian canopy. And so what are some outputs of this model? This figure shows the effective shade deficits along the main stem of the South Fork Nooksack River in 1 kilometer increments. And so these shade, in summary, the deficits range from 4 to 32% deficit, with an average deficit of 13%. So the TMDL is calculated by measuring the modeled in-stream thermal difference between the existing vegetation observed at the time of the study and that natural condition, the system potential vegetation. So the system potential vegetation was defined as the growth after 100 years, the riparian growth, to achieve an average riparian canopy height of 166 feet and a buffer width of 150 feet outside the near stream disturbance zone. So that's where the trees can become established. However, one component of the study adjusted this system potential tree height definition and the buffer width, and I'll elaborate on this next summary slide of the TMDL. So we're looking at a longitudinal profile starting upstream to downstream. And this is really summarizing the TMDL into one figure. So I'll spend a little time here. And this is during the warmest time of the year. So the water quality criteria are indicated by the blue line, and they change at different reaches of based on fish use. And then the dark green line shows our system potential vegetation, and it cools down. And so in summary, it just cools down stream temperatures if we planted trees everywhere and they grew to that 100-year growth benchmark of 166 feet. It cools down, the average cools down the temperature by 2 degrees relative to existing relative riparian condition. And the existing condition is indicated by this black dashed line. And then here we see the natural condition is warmer than the numeric criteria, and therefore it constitutes the water quality criterion for this TMDL. And so the additional research was conducted by the Nooksack tribe, and it prompted an assessment of the ability of the TMDL model to estimate natural conditions as indicated by this lighter green line here. And under this scenario, analyzing the model sensitivity to several changes included cooler headwater, tributary temperatures, decreased channel widths, enhanced hypertonic exchange, increased effective shade due to increased vegetation height, And that height was 290 feet tall for the riparian canopy height. And then the buffer width was, the riparian zone was 218 feet wide. And the greatest effect on stream temperature was seen from the increased vegetation height and buffer width. So combining all the sensitivity factors of our most optimistic condition, indicated by the lighter green line, this results in the numeric water quality criteria in meeting that criteria just in limited portions right here. And then we see it does exceed. But so what it does in limited portions, we see an overall 3 degree Celsius decrease from the 100-year substantial vegetation scenario. So that's comparing this darker line to these better than natural conditions. So these ultimately, if we want to compare the supernatural conditions to if we did nothing, that has an average cooling effect of 5 degrees Celsius. Okay, so that's the TMDL really summarized rather briefly here. And now we'll transition into the climate change component. And this was really an EPA project, and they worked with Department of Ecology and other organizations to develop climate change component. So, well, what's the motivation? We know that climate change will affect ecosystems, and the TMDL program is the primary mechanism to assess and attain the water quality standards. But TMDL development and analysis typically uses stationary climates. Kind of saw that in our previous slides. So therefore, the EPA it's interested in incorporating the effects of climate change on TMDL analysis and implementation. And aside from this study, addressing climate change is our biggest challenge for society. So in 2012, EPA launched a pilot project to explore how projected climate change impacts could be considered in the implementation of watershed recovery plans. The South Fork Nooksack River temperature TMDL was used for climate change vulnerability analysis. And the project integrates 3 EPA management programs with a research approach that seeks to bridge the gap between science, policy, and practice, thus moving to actionable science. An overarching objective of the pilot research project was to support the goals of the EPA's climate adaptation plans from the U.S. Global Change Research Program, or the USGCRP, as indicated there. And then this project consisted of 2 separate research assessments, the qualitative and the quantitative, and I'm going to go through those in the next couple slides. So the pilot project incorporated both the TMDL and endangered species recovery plans. And so one objective is to assess the potential impacts of climate change on stream temperatures and stream flows for the TMDL. The other objective is to prioritize stream restoration actions under climate change for endangered species recovery. This also is used to guide implementation of EPA's National Water Program in 2012, based on the 2012 strategy, and that's a response to climate change. And then another objective is to support EPA's national tribal science priorities for climate change and integrating traditional ecological knowledge. And then the final objective is internal to EPA to demonstrate how components of EPA, the region's program office, and the Office of Water, and the Office of Research and Development can jointly engage in the planning, execution, and evaluation of a pilot research project. So this is the qualitative assessment, and the component informs the local, there's a local water resource inventory area, or WRIA, it's RIA 1, salmon programmatic plan for the entire Nooksack Basin. And the qualitative assessment of the impacts of climate change on endangered species recovery actions was led by the Nooksack tribe and included several project partners. I'll go over this method. It's called the Beachy method, and it's restoring salmon habitat for reclaiming changing climate, was used to provide a systematic stepwise approach to analyze climate change impacts, including an evaluation of each climate risk per salmonid species and per restoration action. And this summarizes a lot of information, but this is an example. This table shows the ability of each restoration action to improve habitat and ameliorate the detrimental effects of climate change, broken up by action and priority per river reach. The most important implementation action that ameliorates the impacts of climate change are riparian restoration, floodplain connection, wetland restoration, and the placement of log jams. This qualitative analysis is used to augment the TMDL implementation plan as well as the salmon recovery plan. So that was the EPA climate change pilot study, and this still kind of, it's segueing into how that affected the TMDL outcomes. And this is the final component here on this topic. So this is the quantitative assessment, and it compares the projected increase in stream temperatures driven by climate change. So the TMDL temperature and shade models were rerun with the boundary conditions adjusted for future climate conditions using 3 temporal horizons, along with 3 air temperature scenarios within a range of multiple climate models under moderate greenhouse gas emissions. And modeling allowed us to understand the system under climate change to inform the TMDL implementation plan as well, using a risk assessment-based approach. And as well as critical low flow conditions, there were average conditions were modeled as well, just to understand more frequent occurrences. So here's a schematic for data integration. And in summary, the climate change impact group that CIG is at the University of Washington, assembled outputs from multiple global climate models, and these are GCMs that were downscaled to the region. The downscaled climate model data were used to predict future hydrology using the variable infiltration capacity model, or VIC. And then rather than applying the model output directly to the TMDL, the temperature, the model of the TMDL, a delta or change factor approach was used in accordance with the difference between future and historic climates. So for example, by 2080, we may see an additional increase by as much as 6 degrees Celsius, depending on climate change scenarios, which we'll examine in the next few slides. But first, we'll start with hydrology. This is a longitudinal profile during the low flow base conditions during the warm summer months. So this is when it was modeled for the TMDL. And so when adjusting for climate change, a significant decrease in stream flows were predicted. And so that's the 3 different impact scenarios are here. And this is our existing stream flows as we work our way from upstream to downstream without climate change, is that dark line. And so the stream model in turn predicts that this decrease in flow will also contribute to increased water temperatures as the thermal mass of the stream is reduced. And projections of reduced snowpack will also reduce snowmelt contributions, which reduce groundwater storage to support base flow during the summer critical period. Adjustments to boundary conditions of the TMDL will result in an increase in tributary headwater thermal loading as well, but that's not shown here. So, like the previous graph that I showed you, I'll show you 3 graphs here that does incorporate climate change, and then we can also compare them to a stationary climate. And so, you know, starting with if we did nothing approach, so we didn't plant any riparian vegetation, this is this black dashed line. Under climate change, we see that we are well above this 23-degree daily critical thermal. So this is a threshold basically that fish populations really cannot sustain. And this amounts to a rise ranging from 3 to 6 degrees Celsius during these critical low flow periods. And this is projected by the 2080s. So this is not instantaneous right here. So with the 100-year growth, and this is if we do plant the system potential vegetation as indicated by the TMDL, the top 3 lines are representing that, and then this green line is showing a stationary climate. And so again, we're focusing on that 2080 time horizon. And the thermal increase that approaches and exceeds a single-day lethal temperature for fish. So even if we plant trees, we're flirting with that and exceeding it with the system potential vegetation. And then just for comparison, the black dash line is if we did nothing and incorporated climate change. And this is the final graph. We're going to focus on those better than natural conditions. And this is our best case scenario with full implementation. And so this is the light green line, all sensitivities to natural conditions, as with the research, incorporating the research conducted by the Nooksack River tribe, the Nooksack tribe. And this does not incorporate climate change. So in contrast, when we do incorporate climate change at that 2080 horizon, we're using that medium impact scenario just as an average. We see that even under better than natural conditions, we will be running to stay in place. So, which is indicated by this black dash line, is where we are, and that's not accounting for climate change. So the limits of the shade-only approach underestimates the natural climate forest, underestimates the natural climax forest because other factors that have changed affect stream temperatures. And these include cooler headwaters, different channel widths, and hyporheic flows, which are all sensitive to natural conditions. So factoring in climate change with better than natural conditions shows a stream temperature response that is like doing nothing while assuming a stationary climate. And then I'll just finish up with we're kind of shifting into thinking about that 23-degree lethal temperature. And so this is important to illustrate through a changing climate. And that's what this graph shows. The time horizons are on this horizontal axis, and then the percent of river miles that exceed that 23-degree threshold are on this vertical axis. And then the range of climate scenarios are shown in the blue or red colored areas, while the medium impact scenarios are those dark solid lines. And then as indicated by the blue area, the existing shade may result in lethal temperatures in over 50% of the river reaches during the critical conditions. And we're seeing that now indicated in these 2020 time horizons, those elevated temperatures in certain reaches of the river. And then as indicated by the red area, this is if we do plant vegetation in that system potential definition there in the TMDL, and it will delay the impacts of climate change, but the risk of lethal temperature is projected to accelerate by the 2080s. And that's even with that shade. So what's the take-home message? It's really, we must work quickly to address the degraded conditions of the South Fork Nooksack River watershed. However, it will take 100 years to reach that system potential vegetation that was modeled in the TMDL. For example, the TMDL modeling and analysis predicted an average of 2 degrees Celsius of stream cooling under a stationary climate. However, under climate change scenario, this in-stream cooling effect will be offset by the projected average increase of a range that ranges from 3 to 6 degrees Celsius, even with that system potential vegetation. So when accounting for climate change, the pace and scale of implementing river and habitat restoration will need to increase and is a barrier to implementation due to this immediate demand. Therefore, additional restoration activities along with riparian restoration must be included. For example, restoration activities that increase summer base flows and thermal refugia are also critical to increase the resiliency of this watershed system in the face of the impacts of climate change. So now we can discuss the implementation aspects of this project. And many of these activities have gone on well before the completion of the TMDL. And implementation is probably the most important component. We can really prioritize with a detailed analysis and understand how the system would respond. So it's useful as well to do the technical components, but without doing the implementation work, we're really not going to achieve the clean water we need. So one important thing is that implementation cannot be done without local stakeholder participation, including several governmental and non-governmental organizations. And this requires problem solving, working cooperatively, and innovation. We also need to fund these, and so funding opportunities and combined with willing stakeholders is an important component. And we'll start with things to consider based on the outcomes of the TMDL and the EPA pilot project. And then we'll follow up with the general strategies and tools that we can use to achieve recovery goals. And I'll show you some examples there. So just to kind of reiterate and review, the temperature TMDL implementation addresses water quality, and it's only one component of the broader restoration efforts. We must consider other actions that reduce stream temperatures, which are difficult to quantify in context of a TMDL, and talking about those shade allocations, and especially we've seen here in a changing climate. So, for example, the beachy method for salmon habitat recovery is a very useful approach when assessing the merits of river and habitat restoration beyond that system potential vegetation as prescribed in the TMDL. And because the TMDL model predicts spatially averaged water temperatures within segments that are 1 kilometer in length, it doesn't resolve temperature differences at a finer resolution, or evaluate the availability of cold water refugia. So thus habitat management at a finer resolution than that of the TMDL model share an important role in protecting the watershed and increasing resiliency under a changing climate. TMDL implementation is largely non-point source related, which encourages the funding of restoration activities. Federal, state, and local treaties, laws, and codes also play a role in riparian and endangered species protection. However, climate change regulation alone was not necessarily examined. So, as a comprehensive approach, habitat restoration and fish recovery has common goals under all three strategies: the TMDL to address water quality, the WRA, the RIA 1 salmon recovery plan to address the endangered species, and climate change to anticipating future conditions. The objectives of these three studies work in concert to achieve these bulleted restoration components. And we know that improving the riverine system by keeping these objectives in mind is essential to establishing a resilient ecosystem. Local stakeholder implementation is crucial for success, which addresses several components listed here. Funding restoration efforts is necessary to carry out implementation. However, can be a limiting factor despite a recent increase in awareness of the need for restoration and a recent increase in funding opportunities. Other challenges include the difficulty in correcting these legacy impacts in this highly altered system from historical logging and the removal of log jams coupled with the ubiquitous effects of climate change. So the pace and scale of restoration must increase to achieve cool, clean water and improve the salmonid populations. And by following these general components of the strategy, we may be successful in salmon recovery efforts. So there are many independent programs that implement a TMDL, and it ties into the broader efforts of salmon recovery and protection. The local salmon recovery plan is again that watershed resource inventory area 1. It's an excellent plan. I'll talk a little bit more about just some of the details of it, but as far as implementation tracking, but leadership for these recovery and management plans is under a unified decision-making structure governed by the RIA 1 Watershed Management Board. And this program and board includes several participants ranging from the federal to local level. This program assists by channeling funds from the Salmon Recovery Funding Board and the Puget Sound Acquisition and Restoration. Timberlands are primarily managed by and regulated under the Forest Practices Act to protect water quality, which is administered by the Washington State Department of Natural Resources. Most of the industrial timberlands are in the headwaters of this South Fork Nooksack River and the tributary systems of the headwaters. The Washington State Department of Ecology provides a variety of state and federal funds to implement TMDLs. Portions of TMDL implementation come from Section 319 Clean Water Act funds to address non-point source management activities. To assist in funding and implementation, Ecology developed a comprehensive clean water guidance for agriculture that describes riparian management practices to protect water quality and improve fish habitat. There are several other funding sources in addition to Ecology's program. However, discussing each one is really beyond the scope of this presentation. And then local counties also implement ordinances and programs to protect critical areas adjacent to rivers and tributaries. And this is through critical area ordinances and the shoreline master plan. Farm planning and assistance also applies in certain agriculture areas, and this is known as the Conservation Program on Agricultural Lands, and that's administered at the county level. There's also local conservation districts that assist with farm planning and opportunities to protect water quality. For example, the Whatcom Conservation District has a riparian grant program. And then local tribes such as the Lummi Nation and the Nooksack tribes play integral roles through their restoration and monitoring programs. And they are often at the forefront of recovery activities and increase the awareness in social and political arenas while interweaving the technical and legal aspects of recovery. So there have been, on the South Fork Nooksack River system, there have been several riparian restoration plantings completed, with more needed to establish a watershed scale system to protect water quality. And to recap, the riparian shade is a surrogate measure for the temperature TMDL, and it's addressing the Clean Water Act requirements. So the TMDL analysis identifies shade deficits along the South Fork Nooksack River that can be used to prioritize the planning activities for riparian restoration. And once established, intact, mature riparian zones are components of a healthy riverine ecosystem, and they obviously cool stream temperatures, and they provide upland ecotone interactions, and they can also reduce sedimentation and mass wasting events through runoff interception. And forests have soil forming processes that attenuate water flow, and they also reduce invasive species pressure. So healthy riparian zones promote large woody debris recruitment that can lead to the racking of log jams, and I'll talk a little bit about those, which then can increase the structural complexity and the channel migration zone of the river. Ecology offers funds for these riparian restoration projects as an important activity where the TMDL does help to leverage these funding opportunities. After the initial riparian planting projects are complete, funding opportunities should also include riparian restoration maintenance and monitoring to address mortalities and pressure from competing invasive species, as well as wildlife browsing. So in addition to riparian shade, we can also protect fish populations through regulation. For example, the Washington State Department of Fish and Wildlife issued a fishing closure of all species to protect spring chinook and steelhead in the broader Nooksack River system, which includes the South Fork. Whatcom County issued a seasonal watercraft ban on the South Fork Nooksack River from June 1st through October 31st to protect salmon redds and emerging and migrating fish. Because in shallow areas, recreators increase the risk of disturbing the redds, while at log jams, many of which are installed for restoration purposes, sometimes recreators can disturb salmonids that are migrating or holding. In addition to this watercraft ban, the state also has banned watercraft with internal combustion motors, and that's been in place for quite a while. And then keep in mind that access to healthy fish populations are important treaty rights to the Lummi and Nooksack people. The Lummi Nation and the Nooksack tribe, however, banned net fishing in this system and instituted voluntary harvest restrictions to be activated over at least a 40-year period. And there's a hatchery, the Skookum Creek Hatchery is a tributary to the system, and it's operated by the Lummi Nation. And so in addition to these tribal fishing regulations, the operation of this hatchery established a Nooksack rescue program to assist with population recovery. So we talked a little bit about or gave a nod to the log jams. And the historical system allowed for the racking of several log jams that were fed by a mix of massive old growth conifers and deciduous trees that grew in abundance within the riparian zone. Creating log jam structures is another component of habitat restoration that is really rooted in the endangered species planning. It augments the TMDL, and the beaching method can be used to kind of qualitatively and prioritize the installment. And you can also assess the efficacy through empirical research. Engineered log jams promote the recruitment of large woody debris that create salmonid habitats for migrating, spawning, and rearing, including scour pools, sorted gravel tailouts, and increases in hyperetic exchanges to create thermal refugia. For example, the Lummi Nation has completed 251 logjam installations and restored roughly 9 river miles along the South Fork Nooksack River. So these massive restoration efforts conducted by tribal natural resources departments are largely, if not entirely, grant funded. Funding limitations are one of the most challenging aspects of this much needed restoration work. Of the competitive options available, Ecology's funds have successfully been leveraged for these types of activities. So including log jams, we're also, floodplains are really important. So the South Fork Nooksack River Integrated Flood Plan Reconnection Project. This is a site that involves acquisition of approximately 700 acres of a combination of floodplain, riparian forest, and steep slopes along roughly 4 river miles of the South Fork Nooksack River shoreline. This project provides a unique opportunity to integrate forest management with adjacent floodplain connections to restore and protect and integrate an ecosystem watershed function. The project will also facilitate the removal of several hundred feet of river levee, reconnecting more than 130 acres of floodplain habitat. One project outcome is to increase climate resiliency by improving late summer stream flows, and also providing flood protection by buffering peak stream flows. And similar to this, moving slightly downstream, the Black Slough is a tributary to the South Fork Nooksack River in the lower Reacherts, where the valley is relatively wide with mixed land cover and of agricultural and rural residents. And has been identified as a restoration area comprising roughly 200 acres. Significant restoration work has already been done where additional work will generate greater benefit. This project is designed to restore wetlands and promote floodplain connectivity, side channel habitat, riparian shading, and increase groundwater contributions during the summer low flow period through floodplain water storage. And like the previously mentioned project, it also buffers the scouring effect of massive flooding events. So restoration activities will include removal of riprap here as well, bank hardening structures, and it also includes riparian planting and some targeted excavation to increase access or establish new off-channel habitats. The placement of engineered log jams will also occur on this project. And this project also will identify targeted land acquisition, and it's right now gone through the planning and permitting phase and ready to be implemented. And this final example, involves upland, and it involves land acquisition to preserve and protect these upland forests. This is another way to help restore the watershed and enhance hydrologic maturity. Through the Stream Flow Restoration Competitive Grant, Ecology provided land acquisition funds to this project to support the expansion of the Stewart Mountain Community Forest Initiative. The community forest is a collaborative project between Whatcom County, the Evergreen Land Trust Association, the Nooksack Indian Tribe, the Whatcom Land Trust, and Western Washington University, with plans to convert 5,500 acres to a restored forest. So we just went through a few examples, but collectively what has been done so far to cool down stream temperatures, improve habitat, and restore fish populations? Well, there's no established universal implementation tracking tool or platform. Each organization that provides project funds and conducts habitat restoration generally track their own work. So we briefly covered the RIA 1 Salmon Recovery Plan and Program earlier. And one component is coordination with several partners for implementation tracking and reporting purposes. However, it is not necessarily comprehensive and is some degree of overlap, reporting overlap. So for example, according to the recovery plan, there are 36 completed and active restoration projects in the South Fork Nooksack River watershed. And in some instances, these restoration projects are also reported by individual organizations. And for example, the Department of Ecology, when we provide funds, it's documented independently. While the Salmon Recovery Plan acts to synthesize this information. And here we have an opportunity to improve our tracking and reporting and implementation to gain a better understanding of the good work that's being done to plan and prioritize future efforts. We also need to track progress through effectiveness monitoring. There is active effectiveness monitoring conducted by local tribal partners such as the Lummi Nation and Nooksack Tribe. Other monitoring sources comes from organizations that install restoration projects. They can document vegetated status and succession. It's vitally important to know how it's doing. And just reiterating here that maintenance is crucial for complete restoration follow-through. Along with tribal partners, the Washington State Department of Fish and Wildlife and the WDFW and the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, conducts regional and local salmon stock inventories. The existing and future USGS streamflow data can be used to better understand changes in streamflow conditions over time. And finally, university research can also provide scientific insight into the status and effects of restoration. So temperature is the primary metric in context of the TMDL. However, we do understand that there are other requirements needed to maintain healthy fish populations, and monitoring these metrics to assess the progress and prioritize activities is equally important. So just in conclusion, we improved our understanding of the impacts of climate change in this vulnerable South Fork Nooksack River ecosystem. The temperature TMDL analysis indicated that shade from full system potential vegetation will keep the stream temperatures at status quo or may even increase because of climate change. Therefore, the beneficial effects of repairing shade will need to be enhanced by a combination of other complementary restorative approaches to maximize the benefit and achieve clean, cool water to restore and protect threatened salmonids. Local stakeholders are leading the way on restoration, while local, state, and federal funds must be leveraged to increase the pace and scale of these important restoration activities. Thankfully, we have active stakeholder participation with common goals, so coordination and implementation tracking is crucial. with that, I thank you all, and thanks, Livia, for your time and allowing me a chance to talk about this project or these projects, and we'll open it up to discussion.
Awesome, thank you so much. I'm going to send the survey in the chat real quick. And then, sorry, we went a little bit over on time, but James, you can stick around for a couple minutes to answer some questions.
Yes, I apologize for
No, it's okay.
being long-winded.
Okay, so I'll start with the first question I see in the chat. Rebecca asked, what is actually meant by natural condition? What was considered for groundwater? I think that was slide 19. You asked that or around there.
Okay. So what was the groundwater natural condition?
She said, what is actually meant by natural condition? And then a separate question, what was considered for groundwater?
Well, groundwater, so the natural condition is really rooted in, sorry, I'm making people dizzy here. Well, I'll just park it there for now, but the groundwater was modeled, and essentially it's based on observation and during the low stream flow, the base flow conditions during that critical period, the warmest time of the year. And I think this TMDL was probably in beginning of August, I believe, the first week of August or the last week of July. It's pretty common. So the groundwater contributions for natural conditions were they were quantified through observation, and then that was put into the model, if that helps answer the question. And then the system potential vegetation, that natural condition is based on ground observations, and it's the average canopy height. And some of that can also be informed. I think this TMDL used a combination of some ground truthing, but it also used research in the area and how tall the trees get based on other folks' research.
Okay, yeah, I don't think she's with us anymore in the meeting, but some other people appreciated the answer to that question. Next one, which USG CRP climate data products or services were used in this study?
I would have to look at the I would have to look at that report.
Okay.
It's pretty big, but it's really well written, and it has some good summaries, bulleted summaries.
Okay. Cool. Next one, George asked how/why was 2080 selected?
That's so when the project was being developed, I think they're just interested in different time horizons, and that was selected. Maybe there's an explanation in that it would be the quantitative report of the three, and I don't know why 2080 was selected, but for the purposes of this presentation, when I'm showing the graphs here, I was just showing that for the most looking the farthest out into the future, what we would expect. And then another graph showed those time horizons with the lethal temperatures.
Okay. Question from Joseph. Did the models incorporating the 100-year vegetation take into account the time it would take for that riparian vegetation to develop? And he said in parentheses, 2080 is only 60 years away.
Right. Good question. It's instantaneous. I think through effectiveness monitoring, we'll know when that average canopy height reaches those conditions and the buffer widths. But it was really done just to quantify the TMDL and show those shade deficits. So it's done also as one component of the water quality standard. So it's more of a theoretically, if we had vegetation everywhere that represented a natural condition, so we can quantify this TMDL. And then we would need that monitoring component to really know when we've reached that system potential vegetation, but we would also have to plant the prescription of the TMDL, that's everywhere along the river, the riparian zone would be 150 feet wide, and we'd achieve those canopy heights.
Does that answer your question, Joseph?
Thanks, James.
I think that was a yes. Okay, so next one from Olivia. What are the implications of incorporating climate change for attainability? What about the EPA requirement for a use attainability analysis?
Well, I will just start with the use attainability analysis. Those aren't very common, so I don't have much experience. I think Washington State probably has one, and they're very involved. So I think the implications of that would be quite a bit of additional study. Maybe we have enough information here for that. But getting to that determination to where we should go down the road of use attainability analysis, I'm not sure what it takes to get there. I think here it's really just the natural conditions is the best way to describe the system and quantify the TMDL, where the use attainability analysis might not produce much, and might not yield much results. But you know, I don't know much about use attainability analysis, limited experience, so maybe I'm overlooking some of the benefits of that.
Right. I believe that's all the questions in the chat. Does anyone else that's still online have any more questions for James? Okay, well, if not, people are saying thank you. Thank you again so much for participating in the webinar.
Yeah, I
Great.
appreciate y'all listening too. I didn't realize I was going over time.
No, it's okay. And thank you everyone for coming. And we will be in touch about the next webinar in the near future. Have a nice afternoon.